Hello, and thank you for tuning in today. This is Emily, the creator of the Community Agriculture Project, and this is a Community Agriculture Project production. So, in case this is your first time tuning in or your first time hearing about the project, the Community Agriculture Project was started in late 2020 as a resource directory to document all of the amazing agriculturally related resources that are available across the states with all different organizations and farms and programs that offer anything from an amazing abundant CSA to various workshops and educational opportunities for people that want to be more connected to their food and to their food system and embrace ideas like food sovereignty. The project has also become an educational resource in and of itself, as through time I have interviewed people about the ways that they view the food system and the ways that they're engaging with it. So I'm especially excited to share this next interview with you. I have just returned from spending about a week or so volunteering with an agroforestry project. So if you're not familiar with the term agroforestry, it is agriculture that incorporates the cultivation and conservation of trees. And the type of agroforestry farm that I was working at was actually a coffee farm that also had other crops like banana, plantain, and was conserving shade trees like the guava tree. So we're going to be getting into all that and more in the following interview, but that's just to give a little bit of background. So what you're about to hear is my conversation with Domenico, known on Instagram as Puentes Naturales, which translates from Spanish to natural bridges. And I think that's a really, really great description for who Domenico is, for his community. And in our conversation, I think we really cover how his project, the Forgotten Forest, and his beneficiado, Centro Tanamá, really embody the different pillars of sustainability, including human, social, environmental, and economical. I'm really excited to talk about it. So let's just get into it, and I hope you enjoy.
We're here at Centro Tanamá.
Centro Tanamá. And can you tell everybody a little bit about what that is and where we are?
Sure, yeah. So like you said, we're in barrio Tanamá of Adjuntas, Puerto Rico, which is in the central mountain range of Puerto Rico, where coffee, vanilla, and other crops are grown. Specifically, we're here at Centro Tanamá, which is our new project. It's our community center and value-added processing facility. We mainly work with specialty coffee, but also cacao and other crops here, and we serve the surrounding community. Most of our coffee, most of our products here are produced and sold internationally, and are produced mainly in collaboration with small and medium-scale farmers.
Amazing. And who are you? How did you get here?
So I'm a New Rican, so that means I'm Puerto Rican. My family's from here. I was born and raised in New York, and like many New Ricans, spent most of my life coming back and forth to Puerto Rico. Both of my parents were small business owners, so my summer camp and my brother and sister's summer camp was staying at my abuelo's house in Aguadilla, which is on the west side of the island, for most of the summers. And so that was my experience with Puerto Rico as a child. I first started coming to Puerto Rico on my own in college. My background was not in agriculture, and even though both my grandparents grew up on sugarcane plantations in Puerto Rico, which was the predominant crop at that time, I didn't really have much exposure and involvement with agriculture, like in my immediate family growing up. In college, I started a project which eventually became my undergraduate senior thesis, and then continued work that I did during our master's program, which was basically on the potential for specialty and value-added agriculture to empower small-scale farmers in Puerto Rico. So to do that, that's first I did a project researching and really thoroughly documenting and tracing the agrarian history of Puerto Rico, as well as the history of economic and political policies that have affected kind of food policy in Puerto Rico from the 50s when Puerto Rico was given U.S. citizenship. After that, that took about 8 months of research. After that, when I started developing it into my thesis project, I started calling up farmers, government officials, nonprofits, farmers, any like rural entrepreneurs that I can find their number, which isn't easy, especially up here in the mountains.
Definitely not.
Just to try to understand what was actually going on the ground. Now that I had this kind of basis of understanding of the historical challenges and dynamics of Puerto Rico.
So you were studying like the policy from the U.S. side as well as the policy that's affecting, like coming from within the island and affecting the island.
Yeah, so
because that seems like two different, maybe sometimes overlapping factors.
Yeah, a lot of my original work was in understanding kind of the U.S. Puerto Rico dynamics and what dynamics of major players exist that are creating the system that we have right now, which in Puerto Rico has been one where agriculture has been on continued decline from the 1950s with Operation Bootstrap, which was an externally led effort by the U.S. to rapidly transition Puerto Rico's economy from a traditional agrarian economy to a more modern service-based and consumer economy instead of a producer economy.
And can you just describe briefly what an agrarian economy looks like?
Well, prior to Operation Bootstrap in the U.S., most families in Puerto Rico live, scattered throughout the island in more rural areas where we produced our own food. It was basically subsistence style agriculture, and it was very community based system. When Spain came to Puerto Rico, they kind of transitioned that kind of agrarian lifestyle to more of a hacienda system. The hacienda system was,
and that's kind of where we are right now too.
Yeah, we're in a similar system now, unfortunately. The hacienda system introduced by Spain was orientated around like export led production and large land holdings owned by, for the most part, Spanish, Mallorcan, Corsican, Balearic, like European immigrants. Spain issued the Decree de Gracias, which promoted Europeans to come to Puerto Rico. So at that time, kind of Spain's colonial power was weakening, and Puerto Rico was a very militarily and economically important holding for them. So they wanted to move white people to Puerto Rico so that they can maintain control over this area here. And so they gave huge incentives for any Europeans who would come here and acknowledge that Spanish crown and start their businesses.
An all too familiar tale.
Yep. You can get into that as well later. Kind of the same the same kind of system and dynamic is going on now with kind of Act 60 and the individual investor incentives that exist in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of tension around that. But yeah, so when Puerto Rico had its golden agrarian age under the hacienda system, kind of my undergraduate work, the original project before the thesis was on the agrarian history, and kind of showing how during that golden age in the 1800s in Puerto Rico of massive exports from Puerto Rico, it wasn't really a golden age for the average people of Puerto Rico. you had all these huge haciendas run by or owned by foreign merchants and foreign people here under pretty oppressive systems. We have the animal system in Puerto Rico, in the hacienda system, which is one, the social order as well as kind of the economic order, the way society was oriented in order to produce kind of all these products for export, like sugar cane and coffee. In the coffee hacienda, you had hundreds of the workers and families that were living and working on the farm. As long as they were working, they were able to have their shacks on the farm where the family and the children would live. The animal or animado workers would be paid in hacienda coins, which were coins minted by large haciendas in Spain and then sent over to Puerto Rico. And then the hacienda owners would pay their employees in coins that were only valid at the farm stores of that farm. So if you're a farm worker, you're harvesting all these crops, bringing them to the farm store, getting paid in money that was only valid on the farm, and then using that money to pay for the crops that you had harvested.
So this is like how that, middle person got introduced here, instead of just like bartering between people, like you have this crop, I have this crop, or I have this resource and we can exchange. Like now there's a middleman presented.
Yeah, and again, since we had that relationship with Europe and with Spain, the entire island was deforested and all made to grow coffee at that time. By the 1890s, Puerto Rico, this little island, was the 6th largest exporter of coffee in the world.
Wow.
And everything about life, all of life was orientated around that hacienda system and what it took to manage and produce these massive quantities of export product, which again wasn't for the locals or wasn't for anyone here to benefit from.
So there's so many directions that I want to take it from here, because maybe we should hold off until later to talk about, where large companies come in and continue that culture. We could talk about just like how that has translated into the modern presence here and how that shifted over the last 70 years. Or how your project is really just like trying to be an alternative option for the culture that's developed here.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit about what exists today, what the dynamics are, and then get into how we're trying to do something different, an alternative to that system.
Yeah.
So like I referenced before, Operation Bootstrap started in the 50s and successfully, rapidly industrialized and transitioned Puerto Rico's economy and society, has led to an existence today where Puerto Rico imports over 85% of the food that it consumes, and exists in kind of this weird in-between state, politically and economically, where we're unequally integrated into the U.S. system, politically, economically. So we're a territory, we're still basically a holding or a colony of the U.S., where we don't, we have limited voting rights, we have limited government benefits that other Americans are able to benefit from, that we're not able to fully benefit from. And we have these really antiquated maritime laws where Puerto Rico is not able to negotiate and directly trade with other countries or our brother and sister islands here in the Caribbean. We're one of the largest markets in the world for U.S. goods. So as a small little island, we are like one of the top 3 largest consuming markets for the U.S. economy, because we have no option of other trading partners. So everything that comes to Puerto Rico must go through a U.S. port first be transferred onto a U.S. owned ship and a predominantly U.S. crude ship, and then sent to Puerto Rico, which increases the costs on all basic goods. So in Puerto Rico, the per capita income is less than half the poorest U.S. state, yet we have, upwards of 10% higher prices on basic goods because of these maritime laws, which all the taxes and funds that are produced from that go towards basically supporting the U.S. maritime shipping industry, which is a huge burden to place on our small island.
Yeah, it's oppressive.
Yeah. In Puerto Rico, we have basically monopolies and duopolies in just about every industry and sector of the economy that you look at, whether it's the banking industry or banking sector.
Banco Popular.
Which you have Banco Popular, which is one powerful Puerto Rican family, and a couple other alternatives, which are all being edged out of the island. You have the shipping companies, you have the ports, you have the contracts for the major roads and the highways in Puerto Rico. There's a family for everything, for every sector and business in Puerto Rico.
And that really, from what I've heard with conversations and with other people on the island, that also translates to the government positions and just in terms of the corruption with when the Puerto Rican government gets money, the families kind of at the top hoard that money and use it for their own interests as compared to dealing with certain issues or letting that trickle around.
Yeah, we have a very complex and inefficient bureaucracy in Puerto Rico that's in many ways still has a lot of the vestiges of Spanish civic law and ways of doing business and ways of administering public services and government. So it's very antiquated. It makes it very, very difficult environment for small businesses to thrive. It's a huge burden to everyone.
And the people, yeah.
Yeah, which is very unfortunate.
And I feel like farmers get a lot of that burden, a huge amount of that burden.
Yeah, so among the duopolies or monopolies that we're talking about, same thing exists in agriculture, which there's massive amount of federal funding for agriculture. A lot of it gets sent to Puerto Rico and it never trickles down to the average farmer. In coffee, and particularly in Puerto Rico consumes roughly 30 million pounds of coffee a year, just domestically here. And we import around 27 or 28 million of that, which is crazy.
That's so crazy.
And the government is the only entity that can legally import that green coffee. So the government imports all this inexpensive coffee from Mexico and Dominican Republic. They bring the Robusta coffee from Dominican Republic, the Arabica coffee from Mexico. They bring those millions of pounds of coffee to Puerto Rico. They warehouse it up here in the mountains. You saw these warehouse the other day.
Yeah.
And then all the major suppliers here in Puerto Rico purchase from the government, and the local government here makes millions of dollars a year just off of the simple transaction, the simple sale of being the only entity that could bring it in and then selling it to a captive market here with no other options.
And so Alto Grande and Yaucono?
Yeah, Yaucono.
And how are they part of that? Because they've been around since the 1800s.
Yeah,
right?
So in this case, it's a duopoly in coffee in Puerto Rico. You have one public entity, which is the government, and then one private entity, which is Puerto Rico Coffee Roasters, which is a subsidiary of the Coca-Cola bottling company in Puerto Rico. Over the past 20 years, they've consolidated most of the heritage or legacy brands of Puerto Rico that we were talking about were around during
In the
Puerto
Hacienda
Rico's
era.
the Hacienda era, Puerto Rico's golden age, where even today those brands say Café de Papas y Reyes, which is coffee of popes and kings, because Puerto Rico used to export to the Vatican and to Italy and all over Europe. This company over the past 20 years acquired all of these major brands, and now controls roughly 85% of the distribution of roasted coffee in Puerto Rico. So they distribute most of the coffee in Puerto Rico. They purchase massive amounts of imported coffee from the government. So they're the major purchaser or client of the government's imported coffee. And then the laws are so in Puerto Rico that you don't have to declare the percentage of Puerto Rican versus imported coffee. And there's very loose marketing and branding laws in Puerto Rico. So you're able to call a product 100% hecho Puerto Rico, which means made in Puerto Rico, even if all of the components of the product are imported. So as you can see, they're not necessarily actively plotting against Puerto Rican farmers or local Puerto Rican coffee, but there's limited incentive for the government or for these major companies to support a value chain and ecosystem in Puerto Rico where small farmers are thriving.
Yeah.
The government has no incentive to support it because they can just import more coffee and make more money. So the less we produce here, the more they can justify importing, and the higher their profits are. And same thing for these big companies. In addition to buying all this imported coffee, this company also controls around 80% of the processing facilities in Puerto Rico. So in Puerto Rico today, of the little bit of coffee that is produced here, which is a few million pounds a year, about 75% of it is produced by small-scale farmers.
So that's a few million pounds a year, and Puerto Rico consumes like 30 million pounds a year? Okay.
So the little bit that is produced here at the farm level is mostly produced by small farmers. So with coffee, you harvest it. Once it's harvested, it needs to be processed very quickly. It starts very high in sugar content, so it starts fermenting and degrading immediately. So the average small-scale farmer who has 10 acres of land or less here who's growing coffee, at that scale, it doesn't make sense to invest in your own processing facility. And most times, even if a farmer wanted to, they don't have the access to capital to be able to even consider those types of investments.
Right.
So what small farmers are forced to do is sell their coffee to a processor or a beneficiado, which here at Central Tanamá we have a beneficiado as well, where we purchase coffee.
But that's really rare, it seems like.
Yeah, so
given that, what did you say, 80% of the processing facilities are owned by Coca-Cola?
Yeah.
Or
so
Coca-Cola or one company?
One company, which the Coca-Cola subsidiary, Puerto Rico Coffee Roasters is the name of the company.
Yeah.
Which owns the brands, like you said, Yaucono, Alto Grande, Café Rico, Café Adjuntas, all these different brands. Like when you go to a supermarket and you see like 30 coffees on the shelf in Puerto Rico, like probably 25 of them are one company.
Wow.
Just all different brands that they own.
And those companies are not interested in supporting agrarian lifestyles. Yeah.
So when the small farmer harvests their coffee, they have this delicate crop that needs to be sold within 12 to 24 hour period, or else they're significantly losing value on it. So they have to go to their local processing center. 8 out of 10 times, the only option in town is going to be Puerto Rico coffee roasters, this big company, and they don't incentivize quality. Every year they kind of decide what their price is going to be and announce it in the beginning of the season, and farmers have to accept whatever it is.
They have to find a way to make it work because they're like, this is my connection to continue my livelihood the way that I know it.
They're in a constant state of disempowerment where they have no leverage to push back and demand higher price for their coffee, because these big companies don't need the coffee. They just need enough to blend in with the imported coffee so that they can call it Puerto Rican.
And like, this might be an early point to ask that question, but what do the laws look like, and what does the lobbying look like to try and change something like that? Because it seems like changing that law, or at least having standards for how much Puerto Rican coffee is in this blend, would be powerful given the current landscape.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the pandemic, we started this project called the Forgotten Forest, and the idea behind it was to demonstrate the potential for high quality, low yielding coffee varieties grown under agroforestry, organic conditions in Puerto Rico. So we started that project. We did crowdfunding for it. We were able to raise some funds to get it started. And then we did that pretty successfully, pretty quickly. That attracted attention and interest from other institutions and organizations that wanted to help us scale it and help other farmers replicate what we were doing. So we've been doing that for the past 3 years with this Forgotten Forest brand. This year we're actually debuting the Forgotten Forest brand, and we have our first cohort of 8 farmers who are receiving full support from the program, and about 12 in total that are receiving some level of support this year, and another 50 farmers who are somewhere in the pipeline of preparing to be eligible for the program.
Yeah, and let me just say, those are really significant numbers given the amount of farmers in the area. That's really significant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have roughly 14,000 farmers in Puerto Rico. About half of them properly registered businesses, and the other half of them more informal.
And that's farming
farms.
all types of crops.
Yeah. And around 4,000 to 5,000 coffee farmers out of that number.
4,000 to 5,000 coffee farmers. So what are you at? 0.1%? I don't know, 1%.
Yeah.
I'm not doing my mental math right now. But yeah, it's about 1% engagement so far with your project. That's only 3 years in.
Well, yeah, this is our first year.
Or 1 year, yeah.
This is our first year of the project. The past 2 years, we're doing our demo on our own farm, raising funds to now scale it to other farms. And now this is our first year that we set up a nursery that can hold 20,000 coffee seedlings, another 10,000 shade tree seedlings, which are going to be coming from whatever we can produce, and the rest is coming from Para la Naturaleza, which is another nonprofit in Puerto Rico that has nurseries all over the island with shade trees and different native trees. And so to get back to to get back to your question, which is a long way back, but I'm still on the road back.
You're on it.
Yeah. We started this project and we made all these standards. And the idea for the future is for this network that we're building of farmers who are fully engaged in the project to become more of a cooperative. And then 2, the Forgotten Forest brand to become more of a seal and guarantee on certain standards that we and our partners abide to kind of be an alternative. We're not super big on making it a certified organic seal or a certified fair trade seal, because we've had the benefit the last few decades to see what's happened with certified organic and certified fair trade. I think more progressive new companies and buyers are kind of moving away from that just being able to call your coffee organic or fair trade isn't sufficient for these buyers or for consumers. They want to know more and they want to see more traceability and transparency.
And people can, let me just mention that people can read some of your thoughts about fair trade on an article that you wrote a couple of years ago.
Yeah, if you go to the link tree, Forgotten Forest, there's like a bunch of links to articles and blog posts and whatnot. And you could like put my email or something here because I can send people like the thesis as well or the literature reviews that I've done on this.
For sure, yeah. Just want to mention that because there's definitely a lot of consumer, not confusion, but there's just a lot going at the consumer, and not everybody has the ability to field that, especially not when they're like in the grocery store.
Yeah.
So yeah, if people want to read a little bit more deeper into that, because that could be a whole conversation and podcast on its own of just like fielding certifications and what that means, but they can go find that there. But anyway,
I think I showed you the new branding a little bit. I don't know if I showed you the full new visual identity for Forgotten Forest.
So what it looks like, just to describe it to the listener, is amongst other things, but most importantly, a QR code on the bag of coffee that tells the consumer.
Yeah, the full process and like basically all the data on the provenance of this coffee that like made it to your bag. So yeah, we're kind of moving away from making a seal. We do want to have kind of our like manifesto, and we're working with a group of agronomists, farmers in our program, volunteers, and some of our partners at TechnoServe and Para la Naturaleza to make like our comprehensive guide for our farming practices, our kind of values and approach and towards impact and whatnot.
Yeah, I like that you're developing the standards from like what you're actually walking the talk and developing the standards from the ground up, not necessarily from the perspective of like, oh, I'm gonna create this huge umbrella standard and get all these people to be about it. I don't know the history of other like stamps and standards, from which direction they were developed, but yeah, I like that approach of what you're doing here.
Yeah, that's why I haven't even been like pushing too much the whole cooperative idea yet. We're trying to get set up and established, and as we like build this network of in a few years from now we'll have dozens of farmers that have gone through now this program and have seedlings and organic compost and technical support and shade trees from us. And I want to like that to happen more organically, more like naturally kind of coming together and have it be from all the members that they want this. And they're invested in creating kind of that more formal infrastructure. So that's kind of more of like midterm or longer term goal for us. But so that we want the Forgotten Forest brand to mean something. We want it to represent all these standards. We're also working on things like our bags are also going to say like desde la Cordillera Puerto Rico, and la Cordillera Central is like the central mountain region in Puerto Rico. And since we don't have a like denomination of origin type stamp in Puerto Rico, where if you look at every wine, it has like the denomination of origin that it's from the Rioja region of Spain. Even other coffee origins like Kona, Hawaii, or Jamaica Blue Mountain, they have a denomination of origin and they have an association that has to approve you if you're going to use that on your label, and if you're going to blend coffee from that region and from outside of that region, you have to specify the amount. Like we have nothing like that in Puerto Rico.
However, like the idea exists, and that is like, this is the northwestern tip of the coffee belt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We got some Saharan sprinkles up in here.
Yes, we want to continue
Special terroir.
We want to develop and more more specifically define Puerto Rico's terroir and coffee growing region and what makes it unique, and then kind of protect that denomination. So we're going to start kind of now putting the La Cordillera label on our bags, and as we develop it, hopefully we'll like fill that up with more and more, because any label or brand is just a name, and
Right.
it's like an empty container, and then you fill it with meaning and you fill it with all these things, and right now that's what it's going to be. But the idea is for that to mean more and more as we kind of develop and define it and work with other experts and agronomists and scientists to really like zero in on what this region is and like what makes it special.
And there's the scientific and agronomy approach to defining that, but it's also like once you create that container, it's so much more than just the coffee. Like it's the community here, and it's the livelihood here, and it's like the sustainability of like what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're excited to do that this year. Most of our coffee is being exported internationally, and we're basically saving ourselves just enough to launch like a direct-to-consumer brand and be able to get some bags of roasted coffee out there this year, and like have a dialogue with the consumers and kind of see how people react and whatnot, and slowly start building that. And yeah, build something that means something to a lot of people, especially those who are working with us here in Puerto Rico and actually are hands in the dirt making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But also that the education is a huge part of it for the U.S. market, for the international market. I think in the last 5 years with all the hurricanes and political unrest, the U.S. has become more aware of Puerto Rico. But still, most people, like don't know exactly where Puerto Rico is. They don't know if we're an independent country or if we're part of the U.S. And certainly internationally, like where our markets are, in like Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Japan, South Korea, they have no idea where Puerto Rico is. So we have an opportunity to educate and to like put our best foot forward and like properly contextualize Puerto Rico from an environmental standpoint, quality standpoint, cultural standpoint, all these different things. So it's an exciting opportunity and a huge responsibility to kind of put our best foot forward.
Yeah, and I really like this approach of just like melding really well with the consumer, with the traceability, like having them be able to see this pipeline is and experience that through your product is just a really great starting point. Like they can just, it's a great educational starting point.
We're piloting it this year, and once we get through this season, we're really looking to really fine tune it and have the kind of traceability stuff be really informative, but also like easy for the consumer to access and kind of understand, not just like a bunch of numbers that they look at.
It's gonna be like nutrition label 2.0.
Yeah, yeah. So we're working with a traceability local company here in Puerto Rico and piloting this with them. So it's exciting. We're like their first client that we're doing this with, and we're really co-creating what it's going to be like.
Yeah, I think probably for a lot of people listening, when they hear a word like traceability, like it doesn't really mean much to people. I don't think necessarily. Like people might not even be aware that like traceability is something they might want to consider with their food. Just because I think of the, not just the deep disconnection that we have with our food, but just, I don't know.
I think there's a lot of powerful arguments for why you should care about traceability and where your product comes from, or what you're consuming comes from, especially when it's a food product or something that you're consuming, like coffee or chocolate or something else.
These things like coffee and chocolate are so deeply inherently political too, that it's like something that I hope that comes from traceability is, and I don't know if you share the same sentiment, but just, it starts with actually understanding this pipeline of the product that you're consuming, which hopefully builds to you building an awareness of the political situation that's happening between the U.S. and Puerto Rico and these other places, around the world.
Yeah. Well, with Forgotten Forest, we see what we're doing in agriculture and in coffee as a microcosm for the problems and challenges that exist in every aspect of Puerto Rico and beyond Puerto Rico, and all sorts of like colonial relationships between the global north and global south around the world. So that's why we're trying to be really intentional at every step. And traceability for Puerto Rico is something that we don't have with our own government. There's no transparency in our government here. Like we were talking about, billions of dollars show up to our door here in Puerto Rico, and they
can you tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And so that's another reason why I think it's important to have transparency here, just to show the stark contrast and the values of having transparency versus what we have now, which is a very opaque system that is abusive and like deeply unfair to the average person here. In Puerto Rico, we're unequally integrated into the U.S., so there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding. And if you go to the politicians at the highest level, you go to the bureaucrats and you go to the supposed experts, no one really knows exactly what the laws are on particular things. No one knows exactly what the tax code is, and there's a reason for that. We have this dynamic, and we have this political economic situation in Puerto Rico where there's these few large, powerful forces that exist, and they greatly benefit from kind of the opaqueness and all of the confusion and and incapacity in Puerto Rico. Like we were talking about before with all the funding that came after Maria for coffee farmers, that was given to local organizations and local and small government agencies. Those small government agencies and organizations didn't have the capacity to execute these huge grants, so the grants were given to big corporations in Puerto Rico. So we have corporations in Puerto Rico deciding what small farmer is getting money for what, and who's getting support and who isn't, instead of
they are not tapped in at all
instead of government and nonprofit agencies doing that.
And why is it better for government and nonprofit agencies to do that as compared to the corporations? It might seem obvious, but just to like have that clarity.
The past several hundred years in Puerto Rico, like we were talking about, from the Spanish and European elite who came here and set up the banks and set up private business and have consolidated power in a few hands. All those dynamics and still exist in Puerto Rico, and they're at the highest levels of government and highest levels of kind of the corporate elite in Puerto Rico, and they're so deeply entrenched that kind of shadow dynamic that isn't as out in the open to the public exists, and it benefits off of the chaos and incapacity and inefficiency of our systems that are supposed to be functioning here. Like
functioning and serving the people, and like the best interest of the people is not held in mind by that level of operation.
No. In a properly functioning society, you have, small, medium, and large institutions of all different kinds and everywhere in between, and power and influence is distributed like across that system. But in the system we have now, you have like all the power concentrated at the very top. There's no like middle ground, and so there's only like the top and the bottom and no middle.
Mm-hmm.
So all these people or all these institutions and forces at the top benefit from there being a mess in the middle, because that they're able to come in and take control in that kind of like power and capacity vacuum that exists. And that's what we've like seen. That's what we've seen time and time again. Unfortunately, here.
So what we see a lot, and especially with like the frequency of natural disaster, hurricane, big storm in Puerto Rico, is like, all right, the government doesn't really do much, but there ends up being a lot of money floating around, especially after these large events. And there seems to not, that money doesn't seem to get to where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, years after Hurricane Maria in 2017, there's still billions of dollars of funds that have just never been properly allocated, that are just sitting and being eaten away by different agencies, but not actually going out to the people. When people came here after Hurricane Maria to help put roofs back on homes and replace blue tarps and help people and fix roads, a lot of the damage that they were fixing wasn't even from Hurricane Maria. It was from like Hurricane George, which came in the 90s, and roads still weren't fixed from a hurricane that came in the 90s, and people still didn't have roofs fixed on their houses from the 90s.
It's been a long compiling of effects. And so I feel like what your organization does is fill in the question mark of how do we have a different level of support, like support that can be sustained for the people's livelihoods here. Specifically for you, you're focusing on like the farmers in this area, because they're very affected by these natural disasters.
With Forgotten Forest, where the mission is to find a sustainable and elevated equilibrium in quality of life for the average agrarian family in Puerto Rico, and we're doing that mainly through specialty and value-added agriculture, other related experiences, other types of diversification. And in order to do that, we understand that a whole ecosystem needs to exist to support these farmers at all different stages of the value chain and across all different areas. So we're not just trying to be a boutique brand or something. We really see from end to end where there's all these deficiencies, and there's the lack of these organizations or incapacity of different support organizations and mechanisms and systems throughout the whole chain to support this.
Right.
So we're doing our best to address that. Here at Centro Tanamá, Forgotten Forest, we're working directly with farmers at every stage of the value chain. We're also working with other nonprofits and institutions to provide financial literacy, education, other financial and business planning services, so farmers can have more understanding and insight into their own operations and make better decisions themselves. And we're just trying to be an alternative to the system that exists now and has so clearly been failing farmers. But I also often say we're not responding to a crisis, we're responding to a sustained but deeply unsatisfactory equilibrium in quality of life for people involved in this way of life.
And so you have a lot of knowledge of kind of the gaps that need to be filled, and you definitely have a big picture of what's going on. And how does that translate, your alternative that you're developing here, how does that translate to the communities here, and how do you build trust with the communities here when you're looking to develop that form of aid, I guess?
We
I don't know
definitely,
if
we,
you would
def-
call it aid.
we definitely don't call it aid. And I don't like.
Or just like you develop a lot of different forms of support, like for the people working in coffee in this area. Like you're able to support them at any part of the pipeline, but like in order for that to actually go through.
Yeah, the reason I don't like the word aid is because we're not just like providing these like inputs. We're not just like we're not treating farmers as people with like with a terminal disease,
right?
Which is like what I feel like a lot of the aid is just like you have a terminal disease. It's not going to get better. Right. You're going to die. You're going to be sick, and you're going to suffer, and you're going to die eventually. Yeah. We're just going to help you make it a little bit less painful. Like we're not. That's what I kind of see aid as, and that's what we've done for all of Africa. But that's maybe another discussion.
Totally.
But that's not what we're trying to do here, and that's why kind of from the beginning, from college to now, the idea is for it to be kind of a hybrid modeled social enterprise, where the backbone of the model is an actual profitable business or system that can actually replenish and feed itself financially. So we're not just giving aid to farmers. We're not just giving them free seedlings and saying good luck.
Which is what Coca-Cola
does.
We're
we're helping to establish and improve the market accessibility and market for Puerto Rican specialty products that support these agrarian livelihoods. So farmers who are working with us, we're really investing in them versus just giving them aid. And so what we're providing them an alternative system where they can work with us at any stage of this chain and benefit from it in a way that makes sense to them.
So it's that can look like anything from buying different forms of coffee from them. Explain what that like looks like on the ground for people, because people don't really see that. Like I've been here for the past week or so, actually seeing all these farmers come through and like have a place to converse, share knowledge, like talk about what's going on and how they're responding to different things in the field. And so like what are some different examples of what that looks like on the ground?
Sure. So with the Tipica project, we're providing free high quality heirloom varietal coffee seedlings directly to farmers, free organic compost for their first 3 years of operations until they get to their first harvest, native leguminous shade trees, and technical agronomic support through our partners, TechnoServe and Para La Naturaleza and others. Then the facility here, we offer to support farmers at any stage of the value chain, which means one, farmers can sell us their coffee directly, their ripe coffee. Unlike any of the other buyers in Puerto Rico, we have incentives for quality and also for environmental practices and traceability. So farmers who agree to participate in our traceability program, the ceiling on the price that they can get is like more than double versus a farmer who doesn't agree to that. Then we have our kind of quality scale.
And where does that come from? Where does that value come from? It comes from the actual value of the coffee, right?
Yeah, and again, so it's not exactly that's an important thing to understand. We're not a nonprofit that is just getting some sort of institutional funding and then being able to write a check to a farmer. We're basing all of our pricing off of market forces and what consumers in the market values. And so we found a niche in the market where they value all of these things internationally. And so one, we're able to incentivize for quality. Depending on the scale of quality alone, farmers can earn up to 3 times the average prices paid anywhere else in Puerto Rico. And then if you take into consideration the traceability and environmental standards, they can make up to like 5 or 5.5 times the average price here.
And so what that actually looks like when you're in the field picking coffee is I don't know if anyone who's listening, you can see what some of the coffee looks like at different stages on our Instagram, but what that actually looks like is there's coffee fruit that's growing on these trees at different ripeness.
Yeah, it does not ripen uniformly at all.
It does not ripen uniformly.
And it's grown on this very extreme terrain and topography.
Extreme. And when you are actually harvesting this coffee, you can go through and just strip the branches and take all the fruit at all different stages. However, there's really, really specific stages of the coffee growth that you actually want to harvest. And that's when it's looking like, it's called uva, ripe. Mm-hmm. And if you're not getting that really, really good quality, then it's really going to compromise like what the brewed coffee looks like. Like most people are familiar with drinking a cup of brewed coffee, and there's once you taste that uva good, like you don't want to go back. So there's a lot of people around that are valuing that same level of quality and perfection. There, I call it perfection. That you're able to connect and like understand that market and connect that to the farmers that are actually out here picking and be like, hey, you should pick it in this way, and we're gonna process it in this way to develop it this way. Yeah.
And going back to kind of like the hybrid like social enterprise model, the reason why like this is important is because that's what really builds in the sustainability component for us, because we're not dependent on continuing to get grant funding to subsidize paying more to farmers. Our customers are the ones subsidizing it, so it's based on a market force where we're just exchanging value. You know, a customer values this, and this is what we're providing. So we're able to then build and scale it based on this model, because it's not based on artificial or temporary things. It's not based on getting some sort of subsidy or passing a protectionist law that gives us our coffee preferential treatment or anything like that.
It's based off something tangible that people want that is of high quality.
Yeah.
And I think that's like something beautiful to shoot for, and entrepreneurs everywhere could learn a little bit from that.
Yeah, and that was just the first layer that we were talking about. Through the rest of the value chain, farmers are not like contractually obligated in any way to sell us their coffee. They can do whatever they want with it. So the onus is on us to structure incentives so that they voluntarily want to work with us. So it's not like a coercive system, which often that happens in agriculture. A big company will say, yeah, I'll give you the seedlings, or I'll give you the fertilizer, but you have a contract with me that I can buy everything that you produce at this low price.
It happens frequently in the US.
Yeah. So we don't have any of that. So after the first stage of the value chain, where you're just buying coffee cherries, we also offer the service of processing coffee for farmers, utilizing some of the methods that we've developed that can add significant quality to like the cup score of their coffee, up to helping farmers actually develop their own brand and sell their coffee direct to consumer. So for example, you saw Francisco. Francisco's a great case study of like a hybrid system where he's kind of a small to medium-sized farmer, where he sells us a portion of his coffee ripe, so just the ripe coffee daily, and part of it he processes himself on his smaller scale processing equipment, and he ferments, dries the coffee himself, and he sells some of his coffee green to us, and we're able to buy that at a higher price. And then he takes some of his coffee, he harvests it, ferments it, dries it, processes it. Then he comes here we offer him free services to hull and classify his coffee. And then we just helped develop a label and his own brand for his coffee, and are now roasting and packaging it for him, charging him a small fee for the packaging and handling and roasting and handling of it. Yeah, and then he's able to sell his coffee direct to consumer. So any way that makes sense for the farmer, and we'll help them develop a business plan for what split makes sense for them. But at that's what we mean by that. At any stage of the value chain, we work with the farmers.
So that's like medium level of hands-on, and you can get lower than that where it's like, oh, I'm only helping with like helping them just get through this end stage, or just like even more of that is like I'm like white labeling almost for a farmer.
And we've done that. We've done that with some other farmers as well, where they have this product that they want to have some ownership of through the process, and we'll offer that to them, and then help them create their own brand. Like we've had other farmers where we created a basic word mark and logo and packaging. They're able to put our sanitary license and roasting and packaging license on their bag so that they can sell to the end consumer, which is another huge barrier for farmers, is being able to get that proper sanitation license on it, and little things like that would otherwise prevent them from getting into their local shop or their local supermarket like that.
Right. And also, given the average age of farmers here, which is around 60, which I think is also true in a lot of different parts of the states, helping out with some of that technical stuff is huge. I feel
the silly thing, like putting together a logo that they can email to the health department and get approved.
Right.
They would never be able to figure out, how to do that.
It would be a big learning experience for them, whereas like it would take people like us 5 minutes. It's really, really valuable stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, and also in addition to that, with like our traceability program, we offer to onboard all of our farmers onto our traceability program, which means 1, developing profiles based on all the data we collect from them, but 2, if they agree to the full traceability program, we'll send out the team to their farm, do a full GIS mapping of their farm, all the different lots, get all of their farmers into the program, so that when they bring a product to us, we know who harvested it, what field it came from, what percentage came from each farm, and then we're able to properly incentivize and compensate everyone.
And who owns that data? Because a lot of the times when people get involved in different organizations and projects that can offer those similar types of, mapping and data collection, there's some fine print involved.
Yeah, so we own the data. The farmers have all direct access to theirs, and they can again choose or not to opt into that. And over time, having all that is going to allow us to make better predictions of needs and whatnot, make better forecasting, and like we were saying, we're also helping business planning and financial planning and literacy for farmers. So if we're collecting data on different farmers or different regions of farmers for 3 years, we're going to be able to do a much better job of helping that farmer make better decisions about their business and where they should expand or where they should go further down the value chain, or other decisions like that. Right now, lots of farmers come to me not knowing what they should plant or not knowing how much, and it's amazing to see like what little information they're like running on, and they're really like taking a stab in the dark a lot of the time and hoping that it works out.
Yeah, and
which is not like a way in any other industry, no one runs a business like that. You can't just like take a guess and be like, oh, maybe this will work, and then invest a bunch of time and money into it. But that's like what happens here
a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like you having transparency around what you do with the data, because I think that like at the end of the day, you just want to help them build up their lives, you know, agrarian life, build up this old agrarian life.
Yeah,
and instead of just, you know, having some type of greedy or other type of incentive behind it. That's important.
Definitely.
Understatedly. Yeah. So we definitely covered a lot. I could definitely cover more.
We've been happy to have you here this week. It's been
Yeah.
awesome getting to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
And showing you some of the project.
Yeah. I definitely think there's so much going on here. I definitely want to say to anybody that's listening, it's wonderful to actually be here checking it out. Y'all are amazing hosts, and you have so much that somebody could do here if they wanted to volunteer kind of longer term. There's a lot going on.
Definitely. Yeah, we didn't even touch too much on more of like the scientific stuff that we're doing and like processing innovation, but that's like a huge part of supporting kind of the business model as well, in being able to consistently like improve the quality of the product here. And we're borrowing a lot of science and experience from other industries like different wine and spirits and other food science stuff to create new and novel processes and new and novel sensory experiences with coffee, using a lot of the natural yeasts and bacteria and microorganisms in the environment, and kind of controlling them to bring out different aspects of the coffee and the cacao, all these different products. So that's exciting stuff that we're diving into as well.
That's super exciting.
Definitely for the future, for like the volunteer program here, probably going to be looking for people that have experience in that area as well, and who could help us like really set up kind of the lab and set up the experiments, because all these experiments obviously come at a cost, especially in the harvest season. So we'll be continuing to do processing experiments. We're probably going to like plan more like in our budget and in our plan for the season, like we have this much to like play with, and we're going to, you know, do these 5 different processing experiments, measure all the data that we can, and see, you know, which processes we want to further refine, which didn't really work out and we're going to scrap, and just continue to like build and do research and development on that side. So that's something that's somewhat new to me. I've kind of gotten into it and self-educated on that just out of necessity, and a lot of the stuff has just been like that, and it's thankfully wound up being things that I love and I'm really engaged and interested in as well. But I definitely didn't come from like scientific or agronomic background. I came from it from more of like the social and economic side of trying to find ways to make this type of this agrarian nature-centered lifestyle viable in Puerto Rico in today's like modern context. And just to do that, I've had to learn so much about agriculture and agronomy. I've had to learn so much about the science behind processing and what influences quality and like sensory experiences and whatnot. So
and it's a journey it's a young journey.
Continue diving deeper into that.
Yeah, so if anybody is listening and is getting all up in their fermentation experiments or, you know, exploring the wonderful worlds of microbiology, stay tapped into this project. We also did not even really get to touch on just like what does it mean to have 34 acres of agroforest?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to have 34 acres of agroforest go through potentially non-predictable weather patterns, and how to remain resilient and not frustrated when things go wrong, and how to remain, having this holistic approach with your land, because as I've visited some other farms around here, I see that people are just like, I know that this fertilizer that's provided from the government is going to be the best thing for these coffee, and that's how I know I'm going to get the most yield. Well, y'all don't take that approach here. So what does that look like? And I know that it's also the very beginning of your journey into that, really, because you've been working with this land since Hurricane Fiona, which was just this past fall. So
well, we have the farm here that we're transitioning to be more agroforestry, more regenerative, and then 2, we have all of these farmers in the surrounding area, which we started this project before we had this facility here. So we already had our cohort of farmers that were scattered all around the mountains. But now that we're here and engaging with the local community, changing minds as well. So everything that we do at the farm, I feel like we're under a microscope now, which is good, because we're leading by example. And taking this farm, which isn't in the ideal agroforestry conditions that we want, and transitioning it more to what we want. We kind of have
And why isn't it in the most optimal condition right now? Can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the farm here, prior to 2011, it was a secondary forest that had been untouched for about 80 years. The government and the agricultural insurance quasi-government nonprofit business entity requires farmers to deforest their land in order to insure their crops, and it only allows for monoculture to insure the crops. So most farmers in Puerto Rico, they intercrop coffee with shade or with temporary shade like bananas and plantains. But in Puerto Rico, you could only insure one crop for the field. So
that is not conducive to agroforestry conditions whatsoever.
So they don't promote agroforestry conditions. They actively require you to deforest your land in order to get the government subsidized fertilizer. And so that's what basically was done here. In order to get the insurance and get the subsidies, they cleared a lot of the land that they were planted the coffee, planted temporary shade with plantains and bananas. And then since 2015, started planting all these leguminous shade trees, which still a lot more has to be.
It's so recent, 2015.
Yeah, those trees. That's why guava and mocha are 2 of the varieties that we're using. Guava in particular grows pretty quick. These trees haven't been here that long.
Yeah,
and they're providing really good shade.
They really are providing a lot for being here since 2015.
Yeah.
And those are native trees, and they're used to or acclimated to this area and the soil weather.
Nitrogen fixing for the soil, providing shade, providing lots of leaf litter, which is preserving moisture in the soil, keeping soil temperatures low, and
keeping the soil from eroding with these hurricanes.
Yeah, and with these crazy topography.
Yeah.
And then the actual root structure of the trees, and kind of the lateral branches and roots are adapted to the Caribbean, where we have these hurricanes and weather events that thrash the trees around. Mm-hmm. So if you take non-native trees and put them up here in the mountains, we go through a hurricane, they're not going to be able to survive. They're going to get knocked one way, then the other, and the main root is going to snap, and it'll be just dead. It's going to either fall be standing dead wood. And that's what we've seen, like even with our neighbor right here that we showed you. He's planted all Carboneiro trees, which is extremely tempting for farmers to grow, and they're provided by another big corporation in Puerto Rico that aggressively promotes them to farmers as this like too good to be true tree, because it literally is too good to be true.
Yes.
It's this like, it's another like not a terrible tree, but it's a leguminous shade tree that grows extremely fast. So farmers are able to plant it, and in a year and a half, they have shade for their coffee.
Why is shade? Can you just explain to somebody who's not aware of coffee why shade is so important?
So one, for like the ecosystem, all the shade and the canopy structure creates a more conducive environment for birds and pollinators, and other species. Preserves moisture, creates all this leaf litter, all these things that we were talking about. But then two, for quality of coffee. For good quality coffee, you want to slow down the maturation of the coffee cherries as long as possible. So shielding it or shading it from the sun allows that to be a more slow, gradual process. It also allows the fruit to set better and be more uniform than if it's in full sun. But also just the full sun stresses the trees. They're not meant to be in those kind of conditions. So they mature.
The cherry will dry right up.
Yeah, the cherries will dry right up. They'll mature a lot faster and not reach the same sugar density level, which once you have that, there's not much we can do in the process to like put that complexity or density back into the coffee.
So you gotta make sure that plant is happy.
Yeah. And up here in the mountains, we have a microclimate, like you said, on the northwestern tip of the coffee belt. We're actually able to grow coffee in Puerto Rico at much lower altitudes than most of the rest of the world. Throughout most of the coffee belt, you need to go to close to double or triple the altitude that we have here.
We're at around 2,000.
Right here, we're around 2,500. But yeah, more or less from 1,800 to like 4,000 feet, you're able to grow great coffee in Puerto Rico.
There's elevations of 4,000 here?
There's elevations a bit above 4,000, but most of that is like protected state forest. So there's not really much cultivation up there.
Right.
But there is good cultivation at around like 3,000. Like the farm that I'm taking you to today is at like 3,200.
Yeah. I cut you off at that one point if you want to continue.
Which point? The shade trees?
Right before I asked you why shade is important.
I was just talking about the root structure, I think, of the trees.
Yes, and that the too good to be tree.
Yeah. Because they grow super fast.
So the farmers will be like shade is super important for the coffee. So if the farmer like is trying to not cut corners, but just like have things happen faster and try to get this shmani.
Yeah. So a lot of the really good native leguminous trees are very slow growing hardwoods that take like 10 years to get good shade. And a farmer who's planting coffee this year and needs shade isn't waiting 10 years.
Hell no.
Which is totally understandable.
Yeah.
So that's why they choose one, plantains and bananas that grow immediately and provide temporary shade.
What about bamboo?
Bamboo isn't great for coffee. They like compete with coffee for nutrients. They create like an environment in the soil that isn't great for coffee.
Totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, then what's their option?
For small farmers, we're providing them native trees. We selected a couple of varieties that have a pretty decent growth rate and are also native adapted species here. So that's what we're providing with the Forgotten.
Yeah, I'm gonna go work on that nursery.
Yeah.
Right after we finish talking.
And this is the program for the seedlings is about de-risking the endeavor of doing high quality, environmentally friendly, organic agroforestry coffee, because like we've had a few conversations about this. All the incentives are stacked against the farmer being able to make the decision in his mid and long-term interest. And they're always forced to make a decision that puts money in their pocket this week, the decision that, that gives them what they need, what meets their immediate need. And often that is in sacrifice of the mid and long-term benefits of doing it the way we're doing, which is creating a cultivation of higher value crops that are grown under a more environmentally enriching, soil enriching system, which is going to provide you more consistent returns for a much longer time while also preserving the soil and the nearby waterways, versus going the short-term route, which is destructive to the environment and destructive to their own long-term productivity.
Right.
So that happens sometimes, like farms that are like dumping all these chemicals into their soil and have deforested it, so now the naked soil is exposed to like the sun and the elements that are degrading it and eroding it. In 20 years or 15 years, they can't do anything with that piece of land anymore. It's bad soil now, and now we need to move somewhere else.
Topsoil takes so long to form, and if with the wrong practices, it can so easily be washed away.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if you saw the plot at Sander Farms, but up in the forest where we have the 6-acre microlot plot, we have like 8 inches of topsoil up there.
Wow. No, I did not see that.
You have like 8 inches of topsoil and then like a huge mat of like leaf litter.
My God.
You have to reach more than like elbow deep to get to like go through the soil.
Wow.
It's just awesome.
The soil's pretty acidic, would be really acidic in that type of environment, I think.
In what type of environment?
Like just underneath all that leaf litter and kind of in like the more tropical area. Based on what I know, those soils can be acidic.
We have pretty acidic soil. Not in this region, not highly acidic. And more like mid-montane microclimate here. There's more of that more of that acidic soil. Here we have like sandy loam, clay, some volcanic soil, all kind of.
From where?
Together. Huh?
I still don't know where the volcanic soil comes from. If there's no volcanoes here.
No, there's no volcano here. I think long time ago this was formed with like underwater volcanoes and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is a good time to wrap up. We hit a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to share this with people. I hope that like the huge range of everything that you do really can connect with people, because these types of, narrative shifts is what I've been calling them recently. Shout out to Ebony that I was talking to about that's studying anthropology. But these narrative shifts that are occurring, they really take people with deep-seated interests of every single part of this pipeline to take part in it and believe in it and continue to develop it. So, I'm really inspired by everything that you're doing here, and I hope that it inspires people too. Because it's really wonderful. So we're gonna keep fighting. I feel like it's a fight, but it's also like this gentle thing. And it's just a lot of work, honestly.
Like you say, I don't see it as like a fight necessarily.
Yeah.
See, we're building a better alternative.
Yeah.
And that's why we had such a wide-ranging conversation, because everything is needed. We're creating an alternative system. And there needs to be a whole ecosystem to support that alternative system. Yeah. And so there's kind of room for everyone and kind of every perspective. And, there's something needed from everywhere to make it possible.
I think I just want to throw hands. No, I'm kidding. No, I love that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And where can people follow your work?
You can check out ForgottenForest.com. You could also check out our social media, Forgotten Forest and Puentes Naturales.
Perfect. And there's going to be some events happening here throughout the year.
Yeah.
And plenty of ways if you want to get involved to get involved. So tap in, keep up, and thanks for being here. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to follow up with us about any information that was covered in today's podcast, please feel free to send us a DM at Community Ag Project on Instagram or communityagproject@gmail.com if you'd like to send us an email.